Colton Reed thought he was finally free. After 22 years working intelligence for the U.S. government, half of which was classified, he bought a quiet home in a seemingly peaceful cul-de-sac, just outside Arlington, Virginia, a place with woods. In the back, space for his dogs, and most importantly, no HOA. It was freedom with a front porch. But 3 months in, strange things started happening. It began with a knock on his door. A woman in an ill-fitting blazer and oversized sunglasses was holding a clipboard and wearing what looked like a plastic badge. Next to her was a weary man in loafers to clean for someone who claimed to patrol the grounds. "Mr. Reed," the woman said, overly cheerful. "We're with the Lakeview Residential Oversight Committee. We noticed your mailbox is not regulation black." Colton raised an eyebrow. "There's no HOA here." The man cleared his throat. "Lakeview community bylaws were updated. We're now operating as a retroactive HOA chapter. Article 9, Section. I didn't sign anything," Colton cut in. "You can't just show up and pretend to be an HOA." The woman grinned wide. "Well, we can. And we have the authority to fine you. You'll be getting a notice." Then they walked away. Colton didn't even slam the door. He just stood there staring at the clipboard in her hand. That clipboard would become a recurring nightmare. Over the next few days, Colton got letters taped to his window, then a red sticker on his trash bin. Then someone flagged his American flag as a visual obstruction. He asked his neighbor, an older Navy vet named Hank, if he'd heard of these people. "They're fakes," Hank growled. "Started showing up last month. Bunch of HOA LARPers with a printer and power complex. But nobody knew where they were coming from or how they had documents." That looked legit enough to scare others. Colton's military training kicked in. He began surveillance. He watched the so-called officers drive around the neighborhood in an old beige SUV with magnetic decals that read Lakeview Enforcement Unit. They snapped pictures of houses, handed out citations, and collected fines in the form of PayPal QR codes. Colton followed them once. They parked outside a rundown office space with tinted windows. No signage, no mailbox. But every morning, like clockwork, they regrouped there before terrorizing the block. But when Colton tried to warn the county, the sheriff's office said the documents looked formal enough, and without a complaint from multiple residents, they couldn't step in. That's when Colton realized he wasn't up against just some HOA wannabes. These people had a system, possibly even access to personal data, and they had just escalated. That night, Colton came home to find a note duct taped to his door. "You've been flagged for noncompliance. Next notice will involve civil action. Lakeview Oversight Division." Below that, a photo of his dogs in the backyard and a citation for unleashed aggression. Something was wrong, and the former CIA case officer in Colton knew exactly what to do next. He picked up the encrypted phone he hadn't touched in 3 years, called an old contact at Langley, and simply said, "They're impersonating officials. I need eyes on this." Quietly, his contact paused, then replied, "Copy that. Sending a cleanup team." Colton didn't waste time. Once he made the call, by sunrise the next morning, a silver delivery van parked at the corner of the cul-de-sac. No logo, no plates. And from inside stepped 2 men who looked more like HVAC techs than intelligence agents. But Colton knew better. The taller one gave a subtle nod. "You said we've got impersonators. How deep?" "They're collecting money," Colton said flatly. "They're using fake authority to intimidate civilians. And they're tracking pets." The second man, carrying a padded case, raised an eyebrow. "Pets." Colton handed him the photo that had been taped to his door the night before. "This wasn't taken from the street. It was shot from my neighbor's roof. I checked the angle." The man whistled low. They're casing homes. This is bigger than HOA cosplay. Within an hour, the team had set up mobile surveillance drones, flying so quiet they sounded like leaves brushing each other, and van-based thermal monitors. Colton watched from inside his own den as live feeds showed the fake HOA SUV cruising slowly through the street again. License plate, out of state. Windows tinted. Faces partially obscured by hats and shades. But then something new happened. They didn't just take photos. One of them hopped out, walked to Colton's mailbox, and slid something inside Colton's. Pulse spiked. He waited until they were gone, then opened the box, a sealed black envelope. Inside, a single printed message, "Back off, or your secrets won't be secret for long." He showed it to the team. "This just went federal," one of them muttered. "They're not just impersonating. They're probing your past. They know who you are." Colton's jaw tightened. "Then they've made a mistake. I spent 22 years finding people like them. They're about to learn what happens when you mess with the wrong retiree." But it wasn't just about him anymore. Over the next 2 days, more neighbors reported suspicious finds. Fake citations for mailbox heights, garbage violations, even one for a non-standard bird bath. An elderly woman to houses down paid over $800 through a fake compliance portal. Her bank wouldn't refund her, said it looked like a legitimate transaction. This wasn't a prank. It was organized exploitation. And the fear was spreading. People were starting to comply. Some repainted their shutters. Others trimmed bushes and pulled down wind chimes. All to avoid these supposed violations. Colton gathered a few trusted neighbors that night: Hank, the Navy vet, and Lisa, a no-nonsense software developer who already had her own suspicions. He laid it out. They're not real. They're not sanctioned. But they've built a system designed to look official, and people are paying up. Lisa shook her head. They're laundering the fear through paperwork. Hank cracked his knuckles. What's the plan? Colton smiled coldly. We bait them. We make it look like I've violated a dozen rules at once. Trash bins out front. A neon flag. Lawn gnomes, even. The CIA team prepped a trap. That night, Colton transformed his yard into what looked like an HOA nightmare. Pink flamingos, a giant inflatable eagle, solar lights blinking blue and red, a grill in the driveway, and an American flag twice regulation. Sighs. Then he waited. And at 4:42 a.m., they came. But what happened next? Even Colton didn't expect how fast it would escalate. Because one of the fake officers wasn't just here to write a fine. He had a taser, and he was walking straight toward Colton's front door. The van team watched from their mobile command post. He's armed. This isn't HOA anymore, this is intimidation with intent. They radioed in. Stand by. We've got eyes. But if he crosses the line, the man reached the porch, raised his hand. Then suddenly he froze. Literally. A red dot landed on his chest, followed by another on his forehead. A voice boomed from an unseen speaker. Step away from the door. You are now being monitored by federal authority. The man looked up and ran, but he didn't get far. To black. SUVs screeched around the corner. No sirens. Just doors flung open and agents in tactical gear pouring out. In less than 30 seconds. The entire street was covered. Colton stepped out calmly, sipping coffee. Welcome to Lakeview, he said. But this wasn't the end, because the man in custody wasn't talking. And it turned out, he wasn't even the leader. The man they arrested on Colton's porch said nothing for the first 6 hours. No ID. No phone. Not even fingerprints that matched in any federal database. But his calmness, that said plenty. He wasn't scared. He wasn't shocked. He was trained. Colton, sat in the back of the unmarked surveillance van with Agent Walker, watching live feeds and reviewing the men's silent booking video. "You're not dealing with a regular con here," Walker muttered. "This guy has counterintel discipline. It's too clean." Colton leaned in. "So who is he?" Walker nodded to a laptop screen. "We ran a facial sweep. Best match we've got is a ghost operative suspected of working under a shell company in Panama. No name, no country, but always connected to property scams and high-yield targeting." Colton narrowed his eyes. "Then he's not doing this for HOA fees. He's here to gather intelligence." Walker looked at him. "Or build leverage." Colton's gut twisted. It all lined up now. The Clipboard crew, the fake finds, the data harvesting, photos of pets, interior layouts seen through windows, payment info, patterns. They weren't harassing for kicks, they were cataloging the neighborhood for someone higher up. And that someone just took a bold risk, because while one imposter sat silent in custody, the rest of the so-called Lakeview Oversight Committee vanished overnight. No SUV, no patrols. Even the fake office building was gutted. Hard drives fried. Furniture gone. Lease terminated. Clean sweep. Colton stood at the center of the now vacant headquarters. The smell of bleach still in the air. They knew. "The arrest happened before the media did," he said. "Someone tipped them." Walker didn't flinch. "We've got a leak, and whoever's running this wants you to know you've made it personal." Colton looked out the window, scanning the lot. That's when he noticed the fire alarm panel had been removed, but the wall behind it was newer drywall. He tapped twice. Hollow. Colton pulled out a pocket knife, cut through the section, and pulled out a metal box no larger than a lunch tray. Inside, a simple thumb drive sealed in plastic and taped to a note. "You want answers? Start digging. But be warned, not all neighbors are what they seem." Walker stared at the message. Colton didn't blink. They left this on purpose. Why? Because this isn't about HOA control anymore. This is a test. Back at his house, Colton plugged the drive into an isolated laptop, no network, no recording devices. What loaded wasn't a virus dot, it was a series of recorded neighborhood feeds. Drone angles, internal home views, heat maps, phone call logs, hundreds of gigs of surveillance all centered on Lakeview residents. And then a folder labeled Tier 1, Assets. Inside, 5 names. One was Hank, the Navy vet. Another was Lisa, the programmer. And the third was Colton. He scrolled down. Each file contained detailed psychological profiles, military backgrounds, possible leverage points, family info, blackmail angles. Colton slammed the lid shut. "This wasn't random," he said aloud. "They're building dossiers on every ex-military and federal connected resident on the street." He picked up his encrypted line. "Walker, we've got a high-level targeting op disguised as neighborhood enforcement. This isn't domestic. This is foreign-backed intelligence gathering." There was a pause. Then Walker replied, "It gets worse." Colton frowned. "How?" "One of the neighbors on the Tier 1 list just withdrew $500,000 and left town." "Who?" Walker sent over the name, Raymond Keller. Colton froze. Raymond was the quiet guy next door. The one always waving, offering beer at barbecues. Nobody suspected him. He didn't talk much, didn't bother anyone, just kept his yard clean and stayed under the radar. Until now, Colton stared out his window toward Raymond's house. Empty driveway, mailbox full, curtains drawn. But a strange glint flickered near the side fence. A small red lens barely the size of a pen cap. A camera. Still on. Still watching. Colton turned slowly and whispered. He was never a neighbor. He was their handler. Back in the van, Walker's team reviewed satellite logs. Keller had made over a dozen untraceable calls through a secure VoIP relay, all before Colton's porch standoff. Who was he calling? Walker asked. Nobody had the answer yet, but the final call came with a chilling message that Walker read aloud. Target aware. Phase to compromised. Move to contingency protocol. Colton's jaw clenched. We're not dealing with Clipboard cowboys anymore. We're in the middle of a domestic cloak operation, Walker said, and we just triggered their panic button. Raymond Keller's house sat silent, but Colton didn't trust silence. Not anymore. He stood across the street at 3 a.m., dressed in black, his breathing controlled, his pulse low. The old instincts hadn't dulled. Every inch of the suburban street was under darkness except for a single flickering porch light, too. Doors down. Colton scanned the area. Nothing moved, and yet he felt it. The air was too still. Keller hadn't just left. He had vanished. And Colton knew people like him didn't run, they relocated by design. When handlers disappear, it means the op is over or it's gone sideways. Colton was betting on the latter. He moved in. The side gate to Keller's yard was locked with a cheap padlock. Amateurs would go around. Colton didn't. He snapped it silently, with bolt cutters, then slipped through the garden shadows. He kept low and reached the back window. Keller's office, if he remembered right. He peeked in. Bookshelf, desk, laptop gone, printer gone. But one thing was off, a scorch mark on the far wall, small but deliberate. That wasn't fire damage. That was signal jamming residue. Keller had nuked his hard drives before he left still. Colton wasn't empty-handed. He spotted a floor vent near the wall metal, but mismatched. He pulled it gently. It came up with barely a sound. Inside, a small metal safe. Colton SMIRKED. Always check the vent. By morning, the safe sat open on Colton's kitchen table. Inside were burner phones, one old Nokia with a cracked screen and several SIM cards wrapped in foil, and a single manila folder. No names, no labels, but the content was damning. Printed maps of the neighborhood with every Tier 1 home circled in red. Aerial photos, GPS logs. Notes like high-value asset, psychological resistance likely under Colton's profile. And then two words written in bold, red ink across the bottom page, recruit or neutralize. Colton's breath hitched. This was never about fines or mailboxes. This was a grooming op, an effort to either convert former operatives or break them down. And it didn't stop at Lakeview. Inside the folder were 6 more neighborhood maps, each in a different state: Arizona, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, Oregon, and Montana, all with similar annotations. Colton grabbed his phone and hit the secure line. Walker, it's not just us. Lakeview's one of 7 test cells. This is national. Walker cursed under his breath. We need to move. If they're scaling, we're behind. Colton shook his head. Not yet. We move now. They scatter. Let me push them first. You're going hunting. Colton looked back at Keller's folder. Let's just say I'm flipping the clipboard. That evening, Colton gathered the only people he trusted: Hank, Lisa, and a retired FBI profiler named Marjorie who lived quietly at the edge of the cul-de-sac. He laid it all out. The fake HOA, the handler, the wider network. Lisa frowned. So they're trying to infiltrate communities by pretending to run them, Marjorie added. It's control by comfort. They dress up as protectors while mapping out threats. You don't fight a country's military anymore, you weaken its veterans. Piece by piece, Colton stood. We bait them. We create an opening they can't resist. How? Hank asked. Colton smiled. By holding a fake neighborhood meeting. 3 days later, a flyer went out. Lakeview Community Unity Night. Discuss neighborhood leadership. Held in the community field. Public. Open mic. Residents encouraged to share opinions. Colton even put on a borrowed blazer and called himself acting compliance chair. It was all a trap. Walker's CIA team went dark that night, hiding in plain sight. Disguised as curious homeowners, cameras were placed around the park. Audio was patched into a secure van parked near the tennis courts. They waited. And at exactly 7:46 p.m., two strangers arrived late, blending into the crowd. They wore neighborhood polos, took notes, smiled when others complained about property standards. But Colton saw the twitch, the scanning eyes, the subtle ear taps. They were watching him. He leaned into the mic. "I've lived here 3 months, and I've already seen this. Community change for better and worse. But what bothers me the most isn't how tall your hedges are." He paused, scanning the crowd. Locking eyes with one of the fake HOA agents, it's when people pretend to care, while digging for something else entirely. The man's smile faltered. Colton smiled back, because behind the speaker podium was a signal jammer of his own. And the moment he flipped it on, every device within 100 feet was exposed, including the burner phone in the man's pocket. See, I even lit up. Got them? Device signature match. "We have real-time data exfiltration in progress." Walker's voice came through Colton's earpiece. "Ready for extraction." Colton said into the mic, "And I think it's time we hold real elections, don't you?" The crowd clapped. The two fake agents didn't move. But they should have, because seconds later, 2 black vans screeched up, and 6 plainclothes agents tackled both men in a flash. The crowd gasped. Hank stood from his lawn chair. "Well, that's a meeting I'll never forget." The takedown at the community meeting made local headlines, but the feds made sure the story stayed vague. 2 imposters arrested for impersonating HOA officials in suspected fraud scheme. Clean. Clinical. Just the way they wanted it. But Colton knew the real war was happening in silence. The 2 men arrested that night, also silent. Identical MO as the first guy. No ID, no prints, no traceable history. They spoke just one sentence during interrogation. "We are not the first. You're not the last." That was enough to rattle even Walker. Colton didn't sleep. That night, he sat at his dining room table, surrounded by maps, photos, flash drives, and a laptop running software no civilian should have had access to. He wasn't just trying to find the leaders anymore. He wanted the architect, the person smart enough to plan a psychological infiltration, and brave enough to poke at someone like Colton. And then he saw it. One of the GPS traces from the burner phone linked to Keller, the handler, pinged on a known secure frequency. It bounced through 5 proxies, but eventually landed somewhere that made Colton's blood run cold. Bamako, Molly. He froze. Only one man he ever knew used a Molly relay like that. Nathan Griggs. Code name, Ledger. He wasn't just an old contact, he was Colton's partner during black budget operations overseas. Griggs specialized in psychological warfare, infiltrating communities, breaking trust through proxy leadership. Back then, he worked for the good guys. At least, Colton thought he did. But Griggs had disappeared 5 years ago, vanished during a failed extraction in Algiers. Presumed dead. Apparently not. Colton's hands clenched into fists. He called Walker. "We've got a bigger problem." Walker answered instantly. "Go. I know who designed this. Or at least, who trained them. You're saying someone from your past flipped." Colton's voice was ice, not just flipped. "He's refining the same tactics we used overseas, but now he's doing it here. On Americans. With the same psychological scripts we tested on warlords." Walker cursed. "If that's true, We're not just looking at surveillance ops anymore. We're looking at domestic insurgency prep. Colton nodded. Which means this wasn't the last HOA. It was the first. Domino. The next morning, Walker called Colton in. We ran Griggs's name through back channels. You're not gonna like this. He laid down a sealed envelope. Inside, recent satellite images from Mali and encrypted email intercepts. They weren't just theoretical. Griggs or someone using his access keys was recruiting Dot through online. Property management courses, encrypted mentorships, and deep fake training seminars. New fake HOA cells were being trained to mimic control, gather intel, and manipulate fear inside neighborhoods across the U.S. Each was told to target military, veterans, former feds, and law enforcement retirees. Why? Because those are the people who could see through the lies. Colton leaned over the table, a darkness behind his eyes. He's testing which ones will push back, and which ones will fall in line. Or, Walker said slowly, which ones can be converted. Colton turned, already formulating the next step. Then we don't wait. We take the fight to him. That evening, Colton pulled Lisa and Marjorie aside. Hank was already in. They had formed their own version of a neighborhood watch, but not the kind with flashlights and block parties. This was tactical. Colton laid out the maps. There are 6 more neighborhoods flagged for infiltration. We don't know how far along they are. Lisa frowned. How are they choosing them? Proximity to key military installations, retired agents, families with clearances. They're building a net of influence and control. Marjorie tapped the folder, like a domestic version of MK programs. But they're not using drugs. They're using compliance. Colton looked them each in the eye. Here's the part I haven't told Walker. He pulled out a photo. It was him and Griggs. In 2013, side by side, same squad, but the photo had something new scribbled across it in red marker. Lakeview was your warning. The next one, you won't see coming. He found it inside Keller's safe, meaning Griggs knew Colton would find him. And worse, Griggs was counting on it. Lisa whispered. This is personal. Colton nodded. He's not just building a network. He's inviting me in, but I'm not playing defense anymore. Across town, in a luxury hotel under a different name, someone logged into a secure laptop. Griggs smiled as he watched the feed from Colton's kitchen, hidden inside a fake carbon monoxide detector. Game on, old friend, he said quietly. Colton never liked going undercover, but this time, he insisted. He couldn't trust outsiders. Not with Griggs watching his every move, and certainly not with a growing web of HOA imposters spreading through American neighborhoods. Like a virus, if the next cell was already active, then waiting meant losing. And so, within 48 hours, Colton Reed, retired intelligence officer, suburban homeowner, and now, silent counter-operative, moved into Holly Ridge Estates. A quiet gated community in North Carolina that looked pristine on the outside, but according to intercepted signals, was already compromised. The moment he drove through the gates, he saw the signs, literally. Lawns must remain within 2 inches, no flags except HOA-approved colors, all windows must display white blinds only, and standing near the entrance, a smiling woman with a clipboard. Colton rolled his window down. New resident, she asked, scanning his license plate. Her voice was chipper, too chipper. Yeah, just transferred here for work. He handed over a fake ID and cover lease. Paperwork, both arranged by Walker's team. Wonderful, she beamed. I'm Officer Green. I'm with the Holly Ridge Community Compliance Board. We're strict here but fair. She handed him a thick pamphlet labeled Living Harmoniously, Holly Ridge Residential Expectations. Colton flipped through it. 78 pages. 70-8. He gave a tight smile. Looks like bedtime reading. She leaned closer. Just remember, our community runs on trust and observation. Observation. That was the first red flag. Colton's assigned rental home had already been prepared by Lisa and the mobile CIA team. Hidden cameras, signal interceptors, and a private comms line hardwired through a fake router. He unpacked one duffel, locked the rest in a trap compartment under the stairs, and began phase 1. He started small. Trash bins were placed out 20 minutes early. He left a garden gnome on the porch. He let the grass grow to 3 inches. Within 24 hours, violations began flooding in. They weren't mailed. They were hand-delivered, each sealed in an envelope with his name printed in block letters, placed under his door before dawn. But something else unnerved him more. Every time he walked outside, someone was watching. An old woman across the street with binoculars. A man pretending to weed his flower bed who hadn't moved in half an hour. A teenager walking his dog past the same house 8 times. Colton didn't see neighbors. He saw handlers in training. He walked the neighborhood during daylight, counting security cameras, not homeowner security systems, but mounted devices on street lamps, disguised to blend in. Some blinked faint red when he passed. Lisa's signal interceptor confirmed those cameras were feeding data into a third-party relay, with untraceable destination IPs. Classic Griggs. But the biggest clue came tonight's in. At 17 a.m., a ping triggered the back fence camera. A man in a black hoodie approached Colton's trash bins, knelt, and clipped something onto the lid. Colton was already in position. He waited 5 seconds, then flipped the backlight on. The man froze. "Can I help you?" Colton called out, voice calm, almost amused. The guy bolted, but not fast enough. Colton tackled him near the azalea bushes, pinned him with an elbow to the neck, and reached into the man's pocket. A badge. Holly Ridge HOA Compliance Patrol. Fake. The guy started to yell, but Colton whispered, "You're not calling anyone, because I know who trained you." The man's eyes widened. Colton cuffed him with zip ties and dragged him to the shed out back, prepped ahead of time, with soundproof insulation. "What's your name?" The man stayed silent. Colton pulled out the badge, flipped it open, and found something odd behind it. A micros card. He inserted it into a burner tablet. It loaded immediately, encrypted files, surveillance footage, notes. One folder was labeled, "Read Secondary." Secondary. Colton's brow furrowed. Inside were photos of Lisa, Hank, Walker, even Marjorie. They weren't just targeting Colton anymore. They were preparing to eliminate his entire support chain. The man on the floor sneered. "You don't understand. You're just a test." Colton stepped closer. "No, I'm the control variable." Across the neighborhood, Officer Green stared at a monitor in a darkened HOA office. A red dot blinked on a map overlay. She pressed a button on a hidden phone line. Asset compromised. Trigger phase 3. A voice on the other end replied, "Approved. Initiate purge protocol." Back in Colton's house, the lights flickered. His phone line cut. Then the sprinklers came on, soaking not just the lawn, but flooding the crawl space below his rental. And the temperature inside, climbing. Lisa's voice came over the emergency line, crackling. "Colton, they just activated something on your utility grid. Get out now, they're trying to cook your house." Colton didn't panic. Panic got people killed. As the fake HOA's purge protocol activated electrical surges, shorting breakers, sprinklers flooding his rental from below, and a growing hum of power building in the attic vents. He moved fast. First, kill the breakers. He lunged into the hallway panel and yanked down every switch. The lights died. The surge stopped. Second, evacuate the data. He grabbed the burner tablet with the microsed card and shoved it into a shielded case. The card held hours of encrypted surveillance proof of a nationwide Black Ops manipulation scheme. Hidden behind smiling HOA volunteers, third, disappear. He exited through the crawl space, already soaked, and crawled to the edge of the backyard, where Lisa had embedded a temporary escape hatch disguised as a garden irrigation pipe. Colton surfaced 3 doors down, behind an empty house set for sale. From there, he made the call. Walker, Phase 3 is live. Pull the plug now. It's going critical. Copy that, came the voice. We've activated the federal warrant. Teams are mobilizing to the Holly Ridge cell as we speak. Colton added, blow the lid off. I've got proof. I've got a name. Griggs, no. Someone above Griggs. Walker went into overdrive. Within an hour, Homeland Security, agents, CIA Cyber Command, and 2 U.S. Marshals surrounded Holly Ridge under the guise of an emergency gas leak. The residents were quietly evacuated, but not everyone made it out. Because Officer Green had other plans. She had retreated to the fake compliance office, a building hidden behind what appeared to be a garden shed. But inside, it was a fortress of servers, encrypted monitors, and a direct uplink to Molly. And she wasn't alone. Standing beside her on the screen was Nathan Griggs, smirking through a crystal-clear video feed. Colton still breathing? He said. Sloppy. Green replied coldly. He's more slippery than I expected. Griggs laughed. Good. That means he'll be watching when we activate the next phase. He thinks he's won? Tell him I've already set up 3 new test cells. She looked toward the blinking map on the wall. What should I do? Destroy everything, then disappear. But Colton was already there. He tracked the signal to the hidden server building and made his way in just as Green was setting the self-destruct timer on the mainframe. 30 minutes. Enough time to fry every bit of data and erase the entire operation. He stepped through the shadows. Going somewhere. Green spun, startled but not afraid. You're persistent. Not really. I just don't like people pretending to be in charge, she sneered. You think you've done something. We've already uploaded backups. This neighborhood is a tiny sliver of what's to come. The future isn't democracy anymore. It's compliance through comfort. Colton held up the microsed card. Comfort looks a lot like surveillance and psychological warfare. Green smirked. People will beg for that kind of order once chaos knocks on their door. Colton stepped forward. They won't have to, because I'm knocking first. And before she could reach her comms panel, a team of agents stormed the building, Walker in the lead, flanked by tactical operatives. Green dropped her hands slowly and raised both arms. But it wasn't over yet. Walker looked at the countdown timer. What's this? Self-purge, Colton said. Kill the power, now. Walker nodded. A nearby agent cut the primary line, killing the server's mid-wipe. The screens went black. The hard drive saved. The data was intact. Colton exhaled for the first time in hours. We've got everything, he muttered. Locations, handlers, training scripts, financials. Walker looked at him. You think this is really it? Colton looked back at the frozen screen where Griggs's face had just been. No, he said. This is just the veil. He's still out there. Back at the federal field office 2 hours later, Colton uploaded the recovered files into a secure network. One folder was labeled Project Homestead. It included blueprints for nearly 50 fake HOA letters, strategically located near military retiree-heavy towns, government tech campuses, and even schools for intelligence analysts. This wasn't just a scam. This was infrastructure for a silent coup. But the last file made Colton freeze. It was labeled REED contingency. Inside a video, Griggs, staring into the camera, calm, composed. You stopped a leg, not the brain. I trained you better than this, Colton. But that's the problem with heroes. They always believe they're one step ahead. We'll be seeing each other soon, I promise. The video ended with GPS coordinates flashing briefly. They pointed to one final location. Langley. The GPS coordinates pointed to a location just outside Langley, Virginia, not inside the CIA's fortified headquarters, but to a quiet, wooded compound 2 miles away. A restricted property that, on paper, didn't exist. Colton knew it well. It was once called Site Echo, a decommissioned black site training ground used during his early years in field operations. Abandoned for over a decade, it had been scrubbed from federal records. But Griggs had found it. And he had brought the game full circle. Walker met Colton at the entrance before dawn. Both men geared for something between a mission and a reckoning. You sure you're up for this? Walker asked. Griggs knows every move you'll make. Colton zipped up his jacket. Yeah, but I know every move he thinks I'll make. That gives me exactly one advantage. Walker looked at him carefully. We can call in backup. Full tactical squad. Drones. The works. Colton shook his head. That's what he wants. Noise. I go in quiet. And this? Walker handed him a pistol and an encrypted mic. If it gets ugly, I'm coming in. Colton grinned faintly. If it gets ugly, it's already too late. The gate to Site Echo creaked open like a forgotten tomb. The inside hadn't changed: concrete bunkers, collapsed towers, broken equipment left to rot. But the silence? It was wrong. It wasn't abandoned anymore. As Colton crept deeper into the compound, motion sensors in his goggles picked up faint heat signatures. Drones, silent tripwires, smart claymores tucked beneath the brush. Griggs had turned the place into a trap. Colton bypassed them using old patterns he'd memorized from when they trained here together. It was all familiar. Familiar. Until he reached the center of the compound, a low steel structure with a rusted keypad. The door was already open. Colton entered. And there he was, Nathan Griggs. Older now, with streaks of gray at his temples, but still calm, composed, his former partner in every way except intent. He stood beside a terminal projecting data, maps, surveillance feeds, recruitment rosters. The fake HOA empire in full view. Hello, Colton, he said without turning. You made it. You've been watching me, Colton said quietly. Griggs chuckled. You were always the best field operator. It was only right that I let you follow the breadcrumbs. Colton scanned the room, no weapon in sight, but he didn't trust it. Griggs never needed a gun to win a fight. He used the battlefield. Why? Colton asked. You were a patriot. You were with us. Griggs turned now, looking him in the eye. I was, but then I saw the machine. We gave our lives for a system that doesn't care about control, only chaos. What I'm building gives order, structure, unity, compliance. With peace, you're brainwashing civilians, Colton snapped. Weaponizing neighborhoods, turning veterans into targets. No, Griggs said, his voice rising. I'm giving them purpose again. The military forgets them. The system discards them. I offer a mission. Colton stepped closer. You offer obedience wrapped in a warm smile and a fake badge. You're creating a shadow government, one lawn at a time. Griggs nodded slowly, no shame in his eyes. Every war ends with reconstruction. I'm just getting there early. Colton raised the pistol, but Griggs didn't flinch. You won't shoot me, he said. You sure? Because you know this doesn't end with me. I'm just the messenger. Project Homestead has roots now. If I go down, others rise. This isn't a conspiracy, Colton. This is evolution. Colton hesitated. Griggs smiled. And then bang. But it wasn't Colton who fired. The sidewall exploded inward as Walker's team breached with flashbangs and tactical sweep. Griggs spun, reaching for something beneath the desk, but Colton lunged and pinned him. "No more speeches," he growled. They cuffed Griggs and secured the server drives. The room swarmed with agents. Walker looked at Colton. "You okay?" Colton stood slowly. He wanted to be caught. Walker frowned. "Why?" Colton walked over to the terminal. The monitor now displayed a countdown. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 9 seconds. "Because this was never the core," Colton muttered. "This was a beacon." He yanked the cables, but it was too late. The screen blinked out, "Upload complete." Griggs laughed softly from the floor. "Too slow, partner." 1 week later, across the country, an HOA in Nevada suddenly began issuing fines for residents displaying unapproved thoughts online. In Florida, another HOA banned all military insignia from being worn outdoors. And in Oregon, a woman opened her door to find a clipboard-wielding compliance officer handing her a citation for associating with flagged individuals. Griggs was in custody, but Project Homestead had already gone live.